Welcome to Commander Central episode 218, and today we are going to give you 3 pieces of advice about Commander. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.
So this is like the deathbed advice your grandpa would give you as he's about to pass, when he's like, "Don't eat Tide Pods, kid." And this is this is us.
If you need your grandpa to tell you that, I feel sorry for you.
Right. You're like, "Oh man, I shouldn't eat Tide Pods." Thanks, Grandpa. No, this will be actually. We'll try to give like some larger, more complicated individual pieces of advice, things we figured out over the years. But first, how's it going, guys? How's everyone's Thursday afternoon going?
Pretty good so far. Looks like it's gonna rain outside though.
Yeah, I don't have any plans. I'm still working today, the rest of the day, and so is Max. And I'll just let it rain. My lawn kind of needed it anyway, so saves me from having to water plants tonight.
I think we all need it.
And this weekend, and I guess the show will air on Monday, so it'll be over, but we have Command Fest 2 Electric Boogaloo online this weekend, so I will definitely be getting some games in, and I think you're going to try to play as well, Max.
That is correct.
So hopefully that was a good time. The last one was pretty fun, so we'll jam some games with some people. Hopefully some of you listeners actually found us and got to play, and I would bet it will be a good experience. I'm looking forward to that for sure. Any other exciting stuff worth talking about? I guess we just mentioned Command Fest Online, so we could mention the fact that everyone's playing on Spell Table, and WotC just bought that. Any thoughts from anybody on that?
I think it's a cool pickup by WotC, just strictly like the server space Spell Table probably needs as they continue to grow. I know for Command Fest Online 1, that was kind of an issue. We saw some lag with the server and getting booted from game tables. So hopefully that alone is what improves. Who knows what's going to happen in the future, if it becomes like a subscription service or it remains free to use, is still to be unheard of. So we'll see what happens.
So I'm going to take the approach of a listener who doesn't know what this is. And what is Spell Table?
So Spell Table is an interface that lets you play over webcam. And you can use anything, like you can use, Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Skype
Discord.
Or whatever. Basically there's like any way technically that has a video sharing component you can use. But Spell Table's made specifically to play Magic, and it's set up to play Commander because you can have 4 different people in simultaneously. So you bring up your web interface, or your camera interface, pointed at your playmat, and there's icons to click on dice, and you can like randomize order for turn order, and there's the option to click on a card and have it like bring up a zoomed in version of the card, assuming the camera is clear enough that it can register what the card is. So it's basically, if you're going to play EDH online with webcams, it's just the best interface to do that. It has audio, chat built in, everything you want just in kind of one place.
That sounds wonderful.
Well, yeah, I mean, being able to just go to like that one URL, start the game, send it to your friends. You can be in with no configuration, or like there's nothing to install. You just click the button, jump in, you're good to go. It's super, super simple. And it's obviously like a big deal right now when, people aren't playing in person, but there's always been people, how many times have we gotten letters from people or something where they're like, well, how do I start a play group? Because in my small town, there's no one to play with. And no matter what advice we give them, if you are playing in like a small rural area or something, the odds of you finding enough Commander players for a play group is not great to begin with. So I think moving forward, even once we're able to go back out safely and easily to play face to face, having this option out there for people who don't have a chance to find a play group, I think is really, really cool. And I'm glad to see. I think it's good. It'll be good to have some official integration with WotC moving forward for those people that can't play games. And just for situations where you're like, it's a Saturday night and I don't want to put on pants, if you're Max.
Hey, it's Thursday and I don't have pants on.
That's true. I say that as I'm wearing pajama pants right now at 1 PM on a Thursday.
I don't know what you guys are talking about. I'm in dad shorts and no t-shirt.
What a beautiful image for everyone of all 3 of us.
Right.
That'll be nice to have that option too, because, a year ago, like if I wanted to play a game, I had to go somewhere and play a game. Being able to just fire up Spell Table and play a game if I don't want to, get cleaned up and leave the house or whatever, or don't have a ton of time, that's super nice. So
yeah.
I'm glad it exists, and I'm glad WotC is, hopefully their purchase of it doesn't change too much, and it can continue to be a good resource for people out there who don't have other options or who just want the convenience.
Yep, I hope it is wonderful, because I'm not going to bring up the fact that WotC runs MTGO, and that's the greatest thing ever used.
It's something. It is definitely something.
If the rules committee can update their website, WotC should be able to update MTGL one of these days.
That is
Right.
very, very true. All right, if you out there in the listener land would like to share your thoughts on VEDH or playing on Spell Table or how Command Fest went or anything at all, basically, how would you get a hold of us and do that, Chris?
Well, you can find us on a multitude of social media platforms. We'll start off on the Twitter birds, where you can find us at CMDR Central. You can go on to Facebook and search us up, CMDR Central, and you can find us online at cmdrcentral.com.
You can also head over to patreon.com/CMDRCentral. Check out our reward tiers, which will be updating in September to include our awesome new Planeswalker cards. And this week we want to say thank you to new patron Vino, along with all of our other patrons and everybody else who just listens to us every week and hasn't gotten sick of us yet.
Yes, thank you very much for your support, patron supporters, and even people who are just out there listening to the show and clicking like on whatever podcast app they use or upvoting us. Any support at all, even just listening, means a lot. We appreciate it. So thank you all very, very much. I just spent my lunch hour the last couple days actually bundling up cards in envelopes. I haven't started addressing anything yet, but I've started putting them in top loaders and sleeves and putting them in bubble mailers. So the process of getting this stuff shipped out is underway. Hopefully in the next couple weeks we'll be all set to get it in the mail. So I guess that's running a little slow right now, everyone is saying, but we will hopefully have that stuff in patron supporters' hands in the not too distant future. So looking forward to getting that out there. And I think we also have a contest underway here, Max.
Yeah, we do. So we are giving away 8 packs of MTG promo cards to our patron supporters. So we'll select 8 lucky winners in the beginning of September and mail out those packs of cards to them. Along with 2 of those packs, 2 extra packs will be going out to 2 people on Twitter, as long as they just find that tweet on our feed, follow us, and retweet it, and you'll be entered to win those cards.
Excellent.
And we also want to give a huge thank you to Andrew Nolan, who was the one who donated all those cards to the show for us to give away to all of our listeners.
Yes, thank you very much, Andrew. That was an insanely generous thing to do, so we really do appreciate it. Thanks a lot. All right, any final business before we start giving out our deathbed advice to listeners here? All right.
Do I have to be on the deathbed? Like, is that required for this show? Because I'm sitting up right now.
You're just having flashbacks to like when your grandpa was, Max, I wish I had never gotten married and had a family. And then you're like, oh no, I would never have been born. Like, fall into existential crisis for the next several weeks.
That's pretty dark there, Dana.
Or was that just
That was pretty dark.
Was that just me? Was that just me that happened to?
I mean, granted, I'm rewatching Rick and Morty right now, so that's pretty much my life this week.
That's true. Yeah, that's very much a Rick deathbed moment, I guess.
On Friday, Max, Season 5 of Lucifer comes out, so you can start binge watching that.
Can't wait.
It's going to be awesome.
I just started Lovecraft Country, first episode
on
HBO. It was really good. So anyway, all right, I think we've gotten distracted talking about TV we're watching in the quarantine zone, but let's talk about...
I thought we were on our movie podcast today.
We're going to do like we did the April Fool's Day episode a couple of years back where we just never ever got to a topic and just kept digressing over and over again for an hour. I was actually surprised. I thought for sure someone would get mad at that episode, and they didn't. Everyone thought that was kind of funny. So
they want more of them.
I guess more of us
that
just
goes
talking
to show how awesome all of our listeners are.
That's true. They were very patient with our nonsense. Okay, so it's really easy to give away general, always applicable commander advice that doesn't dig too deep into kind of the nuts and bolts of the game. We always tell people to run ways to deal with graveyards, and we're going to definitely keep doing that because it makes sense. There's like a gazillion strategies out there that win games out of the graveyard, and having ways to answer that will cut off your opponents from winning games a whole bunch of different times. So
yeah, don't ever listen to Erin Campbell when she says you should never run any of that.
Don't listen to Erin or Joey Schultz when they try to tell you Scavenger Grounds isn't great. You should have that card in all of your decks. But that's really kind of a simple, basic piece of advice. And while it's true, we're going to try to each give you something that's a little bit deeper, something that like we've ran into personally, and it isn't so maybe kind of bumper stickery as Run Graveyard Hate. Hopefully this stuff is useful to you because it's things that we've kind of experienced and found that is useful to us to know as we play. The first thing I'm going to throw out there is that playing bad cards isn't the same thing as playing at a low power level. Sometimes there's some overlap here, but just because a card is good doesn't mean it can't be played in a lower power level, and you shouldn't feel like you're restricted to playing bad cards, particularly if the good cards in question are cheap to buy and easy to find, and the primary thing that makes them strong is their efficiency. And specifically what I'm talking about here is I've seen situations where people are intentionally running a bad piece of removal, like say Blade Banish or something, when Swords to Plowshares in the same colors is 1 mana, it's a 25-cent card. It's been reprinted 190 times. Every game shop in this country, I guarantee you, has a dozen 50-cent copies of Swords to Plowshares that you can find for your deck. And yes, it's a super strong card that you are going to see in super strong decks. But I want to say you shouldn't feel like you can't run really efficient cards in a low-power deck. I don't think that's the kind of thing you should worry about restricting yourself to power-wise. So feel free, even if you think you're playing at the lowest tier power level in Magic, to be efficient, because efficiency is important, and it's the kind of thing that absolutely does make a deck powerful. The most powerful decks in Magic are decks that are very, very efficient. But that's just one of the things that make them really, really powerful. At a lower power level, efficiency just makes your life easier. It increases the quality of what you can do on your turns. It smooths things out. It just makes the game experience easier. And if someone tells you your Swords to Plowshares is the reason your deck is more powerful than theirs, I don't think you need to listen to that. I think you can play at a super low power level and still run Swords to Plowshares and still run the original counterspell over cancel. I just don't think you need to restrict yourself to bad cards to play low power.
Yeah, the only reason that I can see you restricting yourself to bad cards is if you're playing a budget deck, such as the Gumball thing that Max brought up last week. I mean, stuff like that, that has to restrict you to bad cards.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that like just because a card is cheap and efficient, it can't be powerful, or in conjunction with a bunch of other powerful or cheap cards, the deck doesn't become strong either. Like you can build an Edric's by Master of Tress deck running nothing but like sub-dollar cards and have it be an 8 power or 9 power close to it pretty easily. I don't think you should sit down with a bunch of precons and be like, hey, I'm running Scrib Sprites, you guys can't complain. That's not really what I'm saying. I'm just saying, looking at like a precon. So I took the Ruthless Regiment deck from Commander 2020. That's the one with Jirina Kudro as the face card. There's some pretty clear upgrades in there that you could make just in terms of efficiency that are for cheap, easy to find cards. You could turn Dire Tactics into Swords to Plowshares. You could turn Citywide Bust into Day of Judgment. You could turn Cleansing Nova into Austere Command. That's now a 250 card since it got reprinted recently. You could turn Bonder's Ornament into the Chromatic Lantern's currently really cheap. Heraldic Banner's cheap. Like, you could make a dozen swaps like that in that deck, and it would get better, and it would get easier to play. It would make your life much easier to hold up 1 mana on a Swords to Plowshares than, I think, Dire Tactics is 3. And yes, technically your deck is a little stronger, but it doesn't suddenly become outmatched with other decks at that power level just because you've tweaked it and made it less challenging to get things done. So that's just something I want to put out there is I don't think people should feel like making upgrades to cards, particularly when they're easy to find ones, suddenly puts your deck on a power level beyond what exists for people that are refusing to make just basic changes, kind of. So that's my bit of one of my pieces of advice. What's your first one here, Max?
So my first one is all about brewing and how you play. So my piece of advice would be build decks with your playstyle weaknesses in mind. So most people know I either tend to overextend in games or I sandbag. There's no really middle of the road for me when I play EDH. It's either I dump everything on the board and die because of it, or I play really slow and control the game. It took me quite a while to figure out I should reflect that in the decks I build versus just being like, why don't I have any creatures left in my deck when they're all just got wrathed like 8 times in a row? So the ways I like to combat overextending is run recursion, and not just Eternal Witness. I run 2 to 4 pieces of graveyard recursion in almost every single one of my decks. Some of it may be mass recursion like Seasons Past or Replenish and Face Reward. And then you also need to have some of that single target recursion like your Eternal Witness, Archaeomancer, and like Once in Future. just having 2 or 3 cards in your deck that help you recycle your resources keeps you in the game longer, lets you have more fun, and maybe lets you just counteract the fact that you just dumped 12 things on the board knowing a Wrath was coming. When I play my decks that I know I tend to sandbag in, I tend to play more Wraths or board wipes or counter spells in those decks because they turn into a control deck, even if it's not in blue. Like Dramoka has 4 board wipes in it, I think. So it's just kind of how I play the game, and I recognize that I don't play the game very well, so I need to make sure my decks can kind of counteract that.
That's a really good one. The kind of parallel thought to that I would use here, Max, is I've seen those cards where they feel really powerful when someone else plays them, and when you play them, they don't feel nearly as effective. And I think some of that is based on playstyle as well. There are cards that just do better in someone else's hands than they do in your hands based on how you play. I think this is an extension of that for sure. Your deck should be tweaked to how you play, kind of like some cards are just naturally tweaked to how you play. So you're basically, you're running a bunch of, you're building your deck to function like those cards that are better in one player's hands than they are in someone else's hands. So that is a really good piece of advice. I like that one a lot.
Thank you.
Chris, what's your first one here?
So the first one I want to talk about is something that a lot of people don't really do, and that is, how about we leave your comfort zone? So the first thing I want to talk about with this is, I see a lot of players who play the same colors, and to be honest with you, I am one that is extremely guilty of that.
Sure.
So
I am too.
Let's go down this path. Yeah, we're going to go down this path together. So first thing, you just need to sit in here and think and say, okay, what color do I never play? Now for me, it's green. And then you ask yourself why you never play that. For me, I don't really know why I don't play that. So that's a hard question for me.
Because it's the best color in Magic and you want a challenge.
That could very well be. I'm not sure. So then after that, so you've narrowed it down to what you don't play, why you don't play it. Now look into the cards that are available for that and see if there's something that still fits your play style and the way that you like to play, and then try it. I mean, there's no harm in trying anything. The other thing is, so now a lot of people I see play mainly monocolor or 2-color decks. I know, Dana, you're very guilty of that. I don't think I see very more than that. So why not go up to 3 or 4 colors? And then vice versa. I see a lot of people who only play 3 and 4 colors. Drop down to mono or 2 colors. It allows the game to change for you. You enjoy the game more because you're actually playing another aspect of it. And you get to do new things that you usually don't ever do.
Well, you also, that's the important part, I think, is that's how you learn new things, right? If you're just doing the same thing over and over and over again, not that you can't learn from playing a different 2-color deck, but you absolutely do see different things and see different interactions and get a different angle on how the game is played when you switch up and try to play 3 or 5 colors when you're used to playing 1 or 2, for sure.
Yep. The next thing in this with leaving your comfort zone is play with new people. Now, I know this is going to be extremely hard for some people because some people like their close-knit circle. They don't like, interacting with new people. They're very introverted type of people. They just want to just stay in their, their social bubble type of deal. But if you do this, it helps to broaden your card knowledge. You learn all about new cards because it's stuff that you don't see out of the select few people that you play with. So it's going to be something new. It also teaches you new play styles because every person that you play against plays differently. So it's going to help you in the long run to learn, well, okay, so I'm all about being a windshield wiper player. And when I say windshield wiper, it is turn my creature sideways, attack, untap, do it again. Next thing you know, you play against a guy who all he does is throw spells. And you're like, that seems like it could be fun. So then it teaches you the new stuff that you could be doing.
Right. A good example of that I've noticed playing a lot of webcam EDH lately is coming from the shop where we play. One of the things I noticed the meta tended to do was if one person played a big threat, so someone would drop an Avenger of Zendikar, the other 3 people at the table, their primary concern tended to be getting rid of that threat. So number one of the things that lent in the meta was people tended to not play those big 7-mana bomb creature spells that at least they didn't run that many of them because when you did, it got removed. Now playing on webcam and particularly playing with Joey and Matt quite a bit because we've been playing a lot on the EDH Recast, that's not how those guys play. When someone plays as Avenger of Zendikar for a threat, the response isn't let's deal with Avenger. It's, well, now I can play my Shield Dread and my Elish Norn. The response to a threat.
It's fair game now.
Right. The response to a threat is to play 3 other threats. And then I'm like, I can't respond to all 3 of these. So it took me several weeks of playing for me to change that mindset and realized that just because something strong came down didn't mean everyone was going to deal with it. It might well mean that things are going to get way worse before they get better. And that's something that I had to play a bunch of regular games with a different group of people to kind of realize.
Indeed. So the final thing I wanted to bring up in this with leaving your comfort zone is ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. But on the other side, and this is one of my biggest peeves, is do not hound people.
Yeah.
Now, what I mean by this is, when you sit down, you're playing with someone, you play a game, you're halfway through the game or the game's over or whatever, and their commander and their deck look awesome. Ask them what made them want to play that commander, what they like about it most, because it might help you to get into a different mindset of, oh, so this guy's playing, we'll say Reki History of Kamigawa, but he's playing all mono green planeswalkers or something. It's like,
Sure.
Why did you choose it that way? What made you do that? Because I loved how that played and it was awesome to see. Now, onto the don't hound people. Don't hound experienced players. There are lots of people who've been playing for years and years and years, and you're like, oh, look at my deck. Yeah, help me tweak this. I want to be, awesome and all that. And this is a peeve of mine, and it may make people mad, but, just don't hound the person. Do your research. Ask them questions about certain cards. Now, this is a good example of this. You do your research, and you're like, okay, you come up to an experienced player, you're like, so I'm running 12 pieces of card draw and 2 pieces of removal. Now, should I, tweak that number? What do you think? And then they're like, well, okay, what are you playing? Well, I'm playing so-and-so. And they're like, oh, well, you need way more removal than card draw for that deck, or vice versa. Another good one to ask questions is what about a card versus a card? Vindicate versus Mortify is the first thing that popped in my head. Both are okay cards. They're not phenomenal by any means, but there's a drawback to each of them. One sorcery speed, one only hits enchantments and creatures, but they're the same CNC. So you can get into joyful debates with people and be like, well, what do you think about this versus this? And then they can help you that route instead of them building the deck for you.
Sure, that makes sense. Kind of be mindful of how much of people's time in that regard that you're monopolizing.
Yes, that you summed that up perfectly, Dan. I was looking for a way to sum all that up when I was typing this up, and you summed it up perfectly right there.
That makes sense. I agree with that. Okay, we'll go to my number 2 here. This is kind of a meta, and I don't mean meta as in your playgroup. I mean the higher level above just playing at the table. That's that kind of meta, the overall look at the game as a whole. Avoid vulnerabilities that span a whole bunch of your decks. So when I first started going to an LGS here in town and I was first playing with you and Chris, I think I had 3 main decks I played. I had my Glissa the Trader deck, I had a Sigarda Enchantress deck, and I had a Niv Mizzet deck with a bunch of pingers in it. And my Glissa deck wasn't even really built around recurring artifacts. And that's not mainly what it does now still, but there's plenty of artifacts in it I can recur. But at the time, for whatever reason, I just had a ton of enchantments in the deck. Sigarda was also an Enchantress deck, and the Niv Mizzet had a ton of enchantments that lent itself to the pinger theme, whether it was Charisma to steal creatures, or things like Curiosity, because I was that guy, or a bunch of Pillow Fort effects, because I couldn't really be blocking with Prodigal Sorcerer, so I had a bunch of Pillow Fort kind of effects there to keep me safe too. So that deck had 20 some enchantments in it. And another player we were playing with at one point, I remember he blew out one of my decks with a Tranquility, and I remember him commenting that I put a bunch of enchantment sweepers in all my decks because you run 25 enchantments in all your decks. And then I had to be like, oh no, if he's gonna put enchantment sweepers in all his decks, I can't play like this. So I went through, and that's actually the main reason, in addition to just getting better at understanding Commander, when I moved my Glissa deck to take more advantage of the artifact stuff, that was one of the main reasons, because it was just so easy at that point just to get wrecked by a single enchantment sweeper for every single one of my decks. So that's kind of difficult to do maybe if you've got a dozen decks or something, but you can still do something. And I went back through and looked today. My Sigarda deck doesn't have any artifacts in it, but I have less than 5 in my Kresh deck, my Mina and Den deck, and my Edric deck. So if you run some kind of an artifact sweeper, you might hit one target, but there's a pretty good chance you're going to hit nothing against me if I'm playing those decks. Similarly, my Glissa deck is under 6, Vela's at 5, Edric is at 3, and I think Tauren is at 4. So all those decks are at 5 or less enchantments. So same thing there. Someone dropping a Back to Nature or Tranquility isn't going to do any damage at all against those decks. So if you are running one of those cards to deal with one of my decks with heavy enchantments, there's a pretty good chance it's not going to affect another one. my Isperia deck intentionally has nothing at all that cares about the graveyard in it, so I can run Rest in Peace in that deck, but like, a turn 1 Leyline of the Void isn't going to bother me in that deck. The same thing is mostly true of my Talran deck and my Edric deck. They just don't care. My Reki deck really too doesn't care about my graveyard very much at all, because my Glissa deck does. So like, if I have some decks that really care about it, I want to make sure I don't get punished by doing the same thing in all of my decks. So just try to, if you can, diversify what your threats are so people you play with regularly can't kind of metagame against you.
I think, though, this section right here, though, really speaks to how you build your decks too, Dana, because you build very thematically, where maybe there are people out there that, put the same 6 or 7 enchantments in all their decks because they're just good. And,
sure,
that's their thing. And that's perfectly fine. But I think I really like this point you're trying to make. I also think it happens to coincide with how you build your EDH decks from the ground up.
It's definitely probably a little bit easier for me to do given how I build, for sure. And it's possible, like, if you're maybe playing in an environment where you don't have to worry about that. Like, you can run 25 enchantments in every deck and no one's going to be like, I'm going to run Back to Nature on my green decks. Like, maybe that won't happen, and in which case, don't worry about it. But it is something that I am kind of consciously aware of, and it definitely has dinged me in the past. I haven't like consciously done it, but like I could very easily put 3 or 4 more pieces of graveyard hate in addition to the ones I already run in my graveyard decks, and it would absolutely screw Joey over on when we stream on Wednesday nights, because 3/4 of his decks do graveyard stuff. So if I wanted to do that, I could absolutely punish him a little bit with that.
I'm not hearing anything bad in that statement at all.
Now that I think about it, I might have to make some tweaks. Okay, Chris, I'll pass her over to you for your second one.
Okay, for my second one, I have, how about we choose a theme and you stick as close as possible to this? Now, there are multiple ways of doing this. One I'm going to list is going to kind of contradict what Dana said earlier, and that is limit the cards that you use. Such as, instead of playing all the staples such as Swords to Plowshares or Path to Exile or anything like that, why not play the next card in the chain? So you're limiting what you can do in that deck, so you're not being just another one of those guys type of deal. Another thing you can do is put a huge weakness in your deck. Don't cover all the bases. Leave one weakness open so people have something that they can come after you for, and then it's something that you have to always keep in mind and play against. For instance, I'm not going to run any Mana Rocks in this deck. Or I'm playing a 3-color deck, and you know what? I'm going to play all basics. Or, really good one is, my commander has a keyword, and I'm going to stick with it. A good example of this is your Glissa the Trader deck, Dana. It is all Death Touch. And you don't abuse her artifact ability. Whereas, people could just abuse that ability and all it is just, I'm going to keep recurring this, chaining this, blah, 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 and then they win the game. So then, while this deck seems strong when you're playing against it, you show people, that you're not just playing against another good stuff type of deck. It's not just, I'm going to win doing this and there's nothing you can do about it.
Well, there's strategic advantages to doing that too. I think if people think a deck if they can see that path to victory against you, they're much more likely to ease up a little bit when there's a better target there than they are if they think they have no room to breathe.
Yes.
And also talking about not necessarily playing the most powerful card in the chain, that's kind of the same thing too. Like, just that can take some pressure off you. One of the original versions of my Talran deck, I did have a Jin-Gitaxias in it, and Jin-Gitaxias is a fantastic card, especially if you can kind of cheat it into play. It will win you games. But like, I also found out that people don't like Jin-Gitaxias.
No, they do not.
and not only do they swing at you if they see Jin-Gitaxias, they swing at you really hard if they know it's in your deck in subsequent games. So it was a situation where like I found out I was legitimately better off not having that card in the deck because people didn't want me to, polymorph into it or something. It caused more problems than it built. So there's absolutely situations where doing that it's not just something you do to be interesting or to try something different. Strategically, that makes sense in some situations.
Yep. And with sticking to a, singular theme of a deck, it's going to help your play in the long run. Like, you're going to notice, how to play a deck, you're going to feel good, and it's also going to keep your power level in check, because the chance that Wizards prints new 5 new cards for that theme that you're playing is so unlikely that you don't have to worry about the power creep in the deck.
And again, it's a good, we mentioned this under your last one about how it's a good way to learn new things. That's the same thing. When you force yourself to do something outside the box and stick to a theme, stick to a keyword, stick to having some kind of a weakness in the deck, that's also a good way to like learn a lesson and teach yourself things about the game, and dealing with overcoming those holes in your deck can be just a good bit of homework to do, I think, in a game.
Yeah, I think it also leads to teaching you how you can start seeing people's weaknesses of their decks.
Yeah.
It's like, I have a glaring weakness in mine, so why don't I pay attention? I can see what their glaring weakness is in their deck.
And sometimes by putting a kind of quote-unquote weakness in your deck, I would argue you can also make that into a strength sometimes. If you're in a situation, I'll use an example. My Veil of the Nightclad deck is a pretty solid deck at this point. I have no counter spells in that deck, in part because I didn't have room. Like, all the things the deck wants to do, I don't have 4 or 5 spots for counter spells. It just didn't work out that way. And because it's Dimir, you can't deal with artifacts and enchantments for the most part, aside of countering them, basically, or running like a Scar from Existence or something. So I made the choice that I just can't, I can't run counter spells because I don't have room, and I don't want to run one of the bad removal versions that costs 8 mana. So I'm just going to have to lean into the things the deck does well. And I would almost argue that in some situations, and I think it might be true in that Vela deck, by running 3 or 4 more cards that play into my theme and support what the deck is doing, that is almost better than it is if I was running a few counter spells and running a few of those removal spells that are like last ditch ways to get rid of an artifact or something. So it almost can be a benefit.
I don't care what color you're playing, what commander you're playing, you cannot cover every base. There is no way of doing it. So you got to pick and choose what you're going to lose to, and then just try to be faster or better than them in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, we've mentioned this in the show before, how there's that kind of convention that I've heard, Command Zone mentions it, where, you want to have your 38 lands, then you want 10 ramp spells, 10 draw spells, 10 removal spells, 10 whatever, and they go down the whole list. That's 120 cards. Like, to do
It sure is.
to do that the way it's broke down, you just don't have enough slots in your deck to do all those things the way to do. You have to find out, you have to leave some kind of a hole open for the most part, and being aware of what the hole is that you've left open, understanding what it is, and then figuring out how to play around it is a pretty good skill to have.
Indeed.
Max, what's your number 2 here?
My number 2, and since Command Fest Online number 2 is coming up, just happened, I guess, since this is Monday technically, I'm going to talk about power level in virtual EDH. So something I experienced a lot in the last Command Fest Online is I would sign up for the power level 6 pod. And I have a couple decks that fit into that description very well. And when you get in the pod, some people think the same thing. This deck I own is a 6 in my meta, but when you're out in the wild, it might not be a 6. It's maybe a 9. It's maybe a 4.
Right.
And that was a huge problem for me personally, was no matter what power level I got into, I felt like I was underpowered or overpowered.
Sure.
So and I've actually ran into this a few times playing with some of our patrons through our Slack. So what I've just ended up doing is whenever I think I have a doubt about the power level of my deck and how it's going to hold up against my opponents, I just play a weaker deck, because I'm going to still have fun. I'm going to get to do things, hopefully, that I want to do with the deck. So it's typically Jamoka. I always play Jamoka because I can bend how the deck works with how the game is going along. And then, worst case, if I'm going to spend 60, 90 minutes playing this lower powered deck, I want to have fun doing it. And at least I'm not going to get blamed for comboing the entire pod out on turn 5.
We recorded an EDH Rec cast, what we call a rec room, which is like where we just BS about something for 15 minutes. And I think it got trash. I don't know if the episode's ever going to air, but we talked about power level. And one of the points I made on there was that given a choice between playing a deck that might be too powerful for the pod and like making it a bad experience for 3 people, or me playing a deck that's slightly too low and it being a bad experience for me, I would rather have myself be the person who had a bad experience than have 3 other people have their game get ruined. Like, I'd rather err on the side of me being the person to have a bad time than I would err on the side of having a crappy game for multiple people.
For sure.
So I am, that's absolutely the way I think about it. And also, it's much more satisfying to lose a game where you're underpowered and feel like you still managed to trade some body blows with people than it is to win a game where you feel like you are beating up little kids on a basketball court.
And this also will transfer over to in-person EDH once that starts again, because the same premise holds true. Have a miserable game for yourself or a miserable game for these 3 people you just met at the first Magic Fest we all get to go to.
And I think, I can't remember where he said it. I can't remember if it was on a show or what, but talking to Benny Smith, who's a Magic writer, about that. And one of the things the point he made, and I think actually Shivam Butt said the same thing as well. You can, if you do that with strangers that you don't know, you can actually just like ruin them on the format entirely. If like it's someone's first time playing in a shop or first time playing in public with people playing Commander and they just get stomped, they might just never play again. So it can have a long-term impact too. So yeah, I particularly playing with strangers, I definitely lean into being cautious. Absolutely. Okay, let's jump back to me for my last one here. Just because something didn't work doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. And just because it did work doesn't mean you made the right choice. And that's tough to tell apart sometimes, but let me give an example. I had a friend of mine I used to play a lot of League of Legends with, either as a partner or on a team, and I won't go into too many specifics in case you don't know the game, but like there were situations where he would chase an enemy teammate off into what's called the jungle, which is, you can't see what's happening, there's brushes you can hide in or something. He'd chase somebody off, and I'd be on comms like, you shouldn't chase him, we don't know where his 4 teammates are. And like, no, I can get him. And I'd be like, 10 seconds would pass, and I'm like, no, really, it's been 10 seconds. His entire team could be coming to help. You shouldn't be chasing him. No, man, I got him. 10 seconds later, he gets the kill. See, I told you that made sense. I'm like, no, it didn't make sense. Just because his teammates were dumb and didn't come help doesn't mean you made the right choice. Like, just because you were successful doesn't mean the thing you did was the right call. Just because you didn't put on your seatbelt and you didn't get into a car crash doesn't mean you shouldn't have put on your seatbelt. Like, I that used to drive me nuts when he would do things that were clearly not a smart move and get away with it and think that getting away with it meant it was a good call.
Now, for us World of Warcraft players, that is called being a Leroy Jenkins.
Yes, that would be a Leroy Jenkins move. And I'll use this kind of an opposite example from a game I played in last week on stream. Joey Schultz was playing his Feather deck, and Matt Morgan, I can't remember what Matt was playing, but he was playing something with blue, and I had Talrand, so I was playing blue as well.
Was he playing Riel? I feel like I watched this game.
That's right. Yeah. And the way Feather works, you can cast a spell on Feather and then it returns to your hand at the end of the turn. So Joey has a bunch of these spells that like do a thing, give Feather double strike or give her first strike or whatever, and then draw you a card or give her protection from a color or make her indestructible or whatever. So he's at the point in the game now where, it's like turn 8 or something, and he's able to, on his turn, hit somebody with Feather and then cast 3 of these spells and draw 3 cards and then pass a turn, get them all back to his hand, and then even on someone else's turn when he doesn't care, still cast them anyway to draw 2 more cards, then, go to the next person's turn and draw 2 or 3 more cards, whatever. So at one point, Matt and I had to like stop this. So I think we had 5 counter spells on the stack.
Oh, jeez.
Like someone would go to, I think I went to like Rapid Hybridization, Feather, and Joey cast an indestructible spell, and Matt countered it, and Joey went to blink her out, and I countered that, and Joey went to do, Red Elemental Blast, the card, and I went to count. Like, it was like a ridiculous chain, and after it was all done, he's like, you guys spent a whole lot of resources taking out Feather, and it wound up not working. Feather survived it or something. But the point was, like, it doesn't mean it was the wrong call. Yes, Matt and I blew, 3 or 4 cards each trying to stop the chain, but if we didn't do it, then he would just continue to every single turn draw 3 or 4 cards off Feather. And what wound up happening was the 4th player, Olivia, who we ignored, flipped an Emrakul off the top of what's the Sphinx that she was the top deck Yannette. She had a Yannette deck, but she had the Sorin out there. You reveal the top card of your library and it deals damage to all the players based on CMC. So she clocked us with like 13 and off an Emrakul and then did something else. And so she wound up winning, I believe. But it was still like that. She had really no board state. It was the right call to try to deal with that Feather situation, even if it didn't work out. If we wouldn't have done it there, it would have gotten worse and worse and worse, and it happened to not work, and it happened like she flipped the perfect card off the top, everything broke badly for all of us, but like in hindsight, we still had to deal with that Feather situation, because he would have just kept casting those same 4 spells over and over every single turn. So anyway, look at like, the piece of advice then in summary is like, just understand the fact that because the thing you didn't work, that doesn't mean it was wrong. And even if the thing you did work, doesn't mean it was a right call. You should try to evaluate the things you do in the game, not just based on the result, but whether or not the result was a fluke or something, if that makes sense.
Yep.
We'll throw this one back to you, Max. What's your last one?
My last one is revisit retired or taken apart decks. All of us have retired or benched a deck for whatever reason, whether it's too powerful, wasn't powerful enough, the deck didn't flow. We all have our reasons. But something that I'm starting to work on is revisiting that commander that I took apart and try to think back on why. So for this example, what is my Tajik Blade of the Legion deck? It was the Boros deck I had years ago, five or 6 years ago. And it went through multiple strategies. It was Voltron, I did a token theme, indestructible tribal, and nothing ever really worked. Well, flash forward to 2020, Boros has so many more tools in the game, whether it's cool draw spells or ramp like Smothering Tithe or creatures that can help protect my board or draw me cards. Well, maybe it's time to revisit that color combination or that specific commander and be like, did it get any more toys to play with to maybe pinch those holes closed a little and make this deck something that I want to play again, that can withstand a pod out in the random at whatever power level I'm hoping it's going to be at. And just so, the game changes every year, maybe it is time to look back, find some of those new cards and see, oh wait, this whole puzzle starts to come together and everything is working now. I just had to wait 6 years, like waiting for Lost to end when you started it way back in the early 2000s.
Well, it's easy to kind of get this weird, and I guess maybe it depends on your age too. At some point, at least for me, I've noticed things kind of have got stuck in time on occasion when you move away from them. So I ran into a guy at a hardware store recently that I used to work with, 10 or 12 years ago or something, when like he was just out of college. So in my mind, like I'm talking to him and he didn't look much different, but like then he mentions how his kid just turned 10 and he didn't have a kid then. He was literally an intern out of college when I last worked with him. So in my brain, somehow he's still like 23 years old and living in a apartment. But the reality is 10 years have passed and he's married and has a 10-year-old kid and, a house with a lawn he's buying buying fertilizer for. And time has passed despite my memory of him being as this young dude just out of school. The same thing is very much true of decks, I think, to a degree. You like have this vision in your head of what that Tajik deck was when you took it apart, Max, and time has absolutely passed for Boros since then.
Oh, for sure.
So no, that's fine. That story about that guy at the hardware store popped into my head because that's absolutely true. Things for sure change, and not only in the game, it changes for you as a player and as a deck brewer. How you play the game and how you brew decks has definitely gotten better since that, and has changed how you play that deck. Chris, bring us here to the home stretch. What's the last one you've got?
Okay, so while most of the time everyone, us included, are always talking about upgrading, modifying, whatever else, this card is better than this one, blah, 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 blah. Y'all have heard it, but I'm going to tell you something that will blow your mind. You don't have to play to win.
I object.
Now, what exactly do I mean by this? So, most of the time EDH is supposed to be casual. So playing to pub stomp everyone every game is not fun by any means. So I want everyone to just sit back and have fun. This game was meant to be about people having fun, not cutthroat, victory at all costs. This is Sparta gameplay. No, it was meant to be something fun for everyone to do. So let's talk about fun in general. So let's talk about the random guy next to you who you've played with for years. So he drops a doubling season. And, immediately doubling season is, oh, we need to get rid of this. We need to destroy this. But have you been paying attention? Maybe this guy has not won a game in 2 weeks. So now, while this is going to go against every competitive bone that every person has, but why not sit back and just be like, you know what? I'm going to help him win. I mean, because it just goes to show the camaraderie then. Then you're having fun. Then people, the respect factor out of everybody. Laugh. Show everyone, that today isn't about winning. It's about smiles, laughter, just having a good time. That's what I want to see this game be. Not something where, because I play competitive. I play modern, I play standard, I play all that stuff, and that's just, it gets old. You're not laughing, you're not having fun. And Commander was meant to be something fun. So my suggestions would be like, why not play a new version of the game? There are multiple different ways that you can play this. You can play as Plane Chase. You can play it the King, where there's 3v3. You have the King and the two guys that bodyguards.
Yep.
You could play the Star Formation. You could play targets, where you have a hidden target. Your goal is to eliminate the certain person and ignore everybody else. All that stuff. So just go forward when you play this game. Have fun. Show everyone that this game is meant to be fun, not just all-out brawl, destroy everything, I'm better than you, my deck's tweaked to the maximum, all that stuff. No, just kick back, enjoy yourself, be happy, smile, laugh. It's all I want.
And I would say that's especially important based on what your play group is. Now, like, if there are some groups where everyone wants to just kill every single game. And like, if that's what your particular play group thinks is fun, I don't want to say that you shouldn't do that either. But I think your kind of greater point here is, Chris, is be aware of what the people you're playing with are looking for from the game. Like, listen to what they are indicating the experience they're looking for is, because it might not be what your experience is. And that's a really good point about how someone who maybe hasn't won a game in forever, players can be a resource to a degree that needs to be managed. Yes. And you don't need to clear cut the entire forest sometimes. There are absolutely situations where you need to read the room and be like, that guy hasn't won for a while and looks like he's not having much fun. And I need to maybe you need to like water that plant a little bit and like help that person out. Yeah, no, that's a good point.
I'm glad that you put me last, because this was something that, really been bugging me a lot of times when we've been playing. And you guys probably noticed that there are games where I just kick back and I'm just, whatever, play this card. Oh, that didn't work. Whatever. And I want people to have fun when they're playing. I don't want it to be, anger. Because I've noticed that even in our local shop, where people start branching off because they're like, well, I don't want to play with him because he always plays these decks and stuff like that. And that's just not healthy at all for anybody.
There's also a lot of different, like, you can still tweak your deck a lot, but like, there's differences there with how you're tweaking it. Like, for me, that's a big bit of the fun of the game, is looking at my decks and like figuring out, okay, if I do this and do that, how will that change this or that? What, is this card slightly better in this situation? Like, for me, that's a lot of fun, but the changes I'm making tend to be for efficiency, or tend to be to make the deck do this one theme better. I'm not like, can this tweak get to this combo to win the game that much faster?
Yes.
And I'm not saying my way is right and the person who's tweaking to get to the combo is wrong either, if that's what the play group wants to do. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying, like, you can also find ways to be really, to be really serious about your tweaking and pay attention to that stuff without also pushing things beyond the power level of the play group and making it so people aren't having fun.
Yeah. I mean, everything I said is good advice, especially when you go into a command fest or something. Present yourself as the guy who's there to have fun. Everyone's going to like it. They're going to be, okay, I want to play with him again, because he's not out here to just, ruin our day. He's out here to enjoy himself. We're going to get to know him. Him or her, and just have fun. I mean, have fun. That's all I can say. Just keep having fun.
That's a pretty good final piece of advice just in general, is just have fun.
Oh, for sure.
That would probably work. If you learn nothing else, that's a pretty good one.
Yep.
All right. I think that is going to wrap it up for this episode of Commander Central. I am Dana. You can find me on our Twitter birds at Dana Roach. You can find my good friend Max at CMDRCentral_Max. And you can find my other good friend Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our podcast is edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find him on the Twitter birds at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme that you'll hear on the way out the door is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. We will be back next week with another show. Until then, I am Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.